It was a typical Friday night, and like so many others in my city, I found myself scrolling through Tinder. After a long week of work, I was looking for a distraction, maybe a little fun, or so I thought. My friends had convinced me to give it a shot, claiming it was all in good fun. I had my fair share of awkward dates, but I never expected to stumble into something so unsettling. I matched with a guy named Ethan. His profile was pretty standard: good looking, charming smile, and some outdoor photos that suggested he loved hiking. He had a certain vibe that seemed fun and adventurous, and I was instantly intrigued. We chatted for a couple of days, and he seemed normal enough, sharing stories about his job and his love for the outdoors. He even sent me a few memes that made me laugh. It felt like a classic Tinder romance in the making, so I agreed to meet up. We decided to go to a local bar, a trendy spot that was bustling with people. I arrived first, scanning the crowd for the handsome face I had seen in his pictures. When he walked in, he was even more attractive in person. He had this easy confidence about him, and we quickly fell into a comfortable conversation. The drinks flowed, and as the night went on, the vibe was electric. I felt a real connection. But somewhere between the laughter over shared jokes and the clinking of glasses, I got the sense that something was off. He had this intense gaze that seemed to pierce right through me, and the way he spoke about past relationships had an almost obsessive undertone. He mentioned an ex-girlfriend and how she couldn't handle his intensity. I brushed it off, thinking he was just passionate. The night went on, and I was feeling good, but that nagging feeling in the back of my mind wouldn't go away. After a couple of hours, we decided to leave the bar and go for a walk. The streets were dimly lit, but the energy was still alive. We wandered through the city, and I was enjoying the moment until we turned down a quieter street. Suddenly, Ethan stopped and looked at me with this intense stare. My heart raced as he told me about his love for the outdoors and how he often went camping alone. It seemed harmless until he mentioned that he preferred to go solo because people can be so weak. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to laugh it off, thinking he was just joking. As we continued walking, he started to share some of his more extreme hobbies. He was really into survivalist stuff and had taken courses on wilderness survival. He described how he could live off the land, how he could track animals, and how he found the thrill of being alone in the wild exhilarating. I nodded along, trying to match his enthusiasm, but inside, I was starting to feel uneasy. This guy was starting to sound more like a character out of a horror film than a potential date. Things took a turn when Ethan suggested we take a shortcut through a nearby park. It was late, and I was unsure about it, but I didn't want to seem rude. The park was eerily quiet, with only the rustling of leaves and the distant sound of nightlife behind us. As we walked deeper into the park, I could feel the tension building. Suddenly, Ethan stopped again, this time even closer, invading my personal space in a way that made me uncomfortable. He started talking about the thrill of the hunt and how it was essential to understand fear to truly appreciate life. At that point, I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I tried to steer the conversation away, but he kept circling back to this dark, almost predatory mindset. I looked for an exit, looking around for anyone else in the park, but it felt like we were the only two people in the world. The atmosphere turned heavy, and I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins. I needed to get out of there. I casually suggested we head back to the main streets, but he didn't take the hint. Instead, he moved closer, almost whispering about the beauty in darkness and how most people were too afraid to embrace it. It felt like he was trying to pull me into this twisted world he had created in his mind. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I was stuck, frozen in place by his intensity and my own growing fear. Finally, I mustered the courage to take a step back and told him I was feeling a bit overwhelmed. He didn't react the way I expected. Instead of backing off, he leaned in even closer, his eyes narrowing, and I could see something shift in his expression. It was like a switch flipped, and the charming guy I had met at the bar was gone, replaced by someone else entirely. I took a deep breath, my heart racing, and said I was going to call a cab. I quickly pulled out my phone, pretending to scroll for a ride, and started to edge away from him. I could feel his eyes on me, scrutinizing me, almost as if he was assessing my every move. The air felt thick with tension, and I could sense the change in atmosphere. I didn't want to show any fear, but I was terrified. When I finally saw the headlights of a cab approaching, I felt a surge of relief. I turned to Ethan one last time, trying to keep my voice steady as I said I really needed to go. He just stood there, watching me with that same intense gaze, as if he was trying to figure me out. I hopped into the cab and slammed the door shut, not looking back as the driver pulled away. As we drove through the city, I could still feel his piercing stare on me, even from a distance. It was a surreal, unsettling experience that left me shaken. I thought about all the signs I had ignored, the way I had brushed off my instincts in favor of being polite. I made a mental note to trust my gut from then on. Tinder can be a wild ride, and sometimes it leads you down paths you never expected. That night, I learned that some adventures are better left unexplored, and some connections are best severed before they can become anything more. I still can't shake the feeling that I should have just deleted Tinder that night. It was one of those evenings where boredom set in hard, and I figured, why not? Swiping through profiles had become a mindless routine, a way to pass the time while I waited for my laundry to finish. Most of the people I encountered were either ridiculously cheesy or just plain weird. But then there he was, a guy with a killer smile, eyes that seemed to sparkle even through a pixelated screen, and a bio that was short and sweet. He liked hiking dogs, and he seemed genuinely laid back, the kind of guy you could easily grab a coffee with and not feel awkward. I swiped right, and to my surprise, we matched almost immediately. We started chatting, and he seemed cool. He had a way of keeping the conversation light but interesting, asking questions that felt genuine rather than the usual. What do you do for fun? He talked about his love for the outdoors and how he often went camping on weekends. I found myself getting more and more excited about the prospect of meeting him. He suggested grabbing a drink at a local bar, and it sounded like a great plan. The day of our date arrived, and I spent way too long getting ready. I wanted to look cute, but not like I was trying too hard. I wore my favorite sundress and a pair of comfy sandals. When I walked into the bar, I spotted him right away. He was sitting at the bar, a pint in front of him, casually scrolling through his phone. I felt a rush of nerves and excitement as I approached him. He looked even better in person, that killer smile lighting up his face when he saw me. We talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories. I found myself drawn to his adventurous spirit. He told me about his travels and how he had just returned from a backpacking trip in South America. It was easy to get lost in the conversation. By the end of the night, I felt like I had known him forever. He suggested we hang out again soon, maybe go for a hike that weekend. I was all in. The following Saturday felt like the perfect day for our little adventure. I packed a small backpack with water, snacks, and a couple of sandwiches. I was excited and a little nervous, but more than anything, I was ready to spend more time with him. We agreed to meet at the trailhead around 10 in the morning. He arrived right on time, looking rugged and ready to hit the trail. The hike was beautiful, with trees lining the path and the sun filtering through the leaves. We talked and laughed, easily falling into a rhythm that felt natural. But as the day progressed, things started to shift. I noticed him becoming a bit more intense, almost hyper-focused. At first, I thought it was just his enthusiasm for the hike, but it soon became clear that there was more to it. He started to ask me questions that felt a bit too personal, probing into my past relationships and my family life. I tried to brush it off, thinking he was just trying to get to know me better, but there was an edge to his curiosity that made me uncomfortable. As we reached a particularly scenic overlook, he suggested we take a break. I was more than happy to sit down and enjoy the view. But while I was admiring the landscape, I noticed him staring at me in a way that made my skin crawl. It wasn't the look of admiration, It felt more like he was cataloging every detail about me, as if I was some sort of specimen. I tried to laugh it off, but inside, I was starting to feel a bit trapped. When we resumed the hike, the atmosphere shifted completely. He became more animated, his words spilling out in rapid succession as he talked about the wilderness survival skills and how easy it would be to get lost out there. I remember thinking how strange it was for someone to have such a detailed knowledge of the woods. He mentioned how he liked to camp alone sometimes, how he found peace in the solitude. My heart raced as I thought about being out in the wild with someone who seemed to thrive on isolation. I dismissed it as paranoia, but I kept my guard up. As we continued down the trail, I started to feel a sense of dread creeping in. I tried to maintain a light conversation, but his responses were becoming more erratic. At one point, he stopped suddenly, looking down a narrow, overgrown path that branched off from the main trail. He turned to me with that intense gaze, and I felt my stomach drop. He suggested we explore it, but something felt off, and I instinctively shook my head. I didn't want to venture into the unknown with someone I barely knew, especially when his demeanor had shifted so drastically. As we made our way back, I felt increasingly anxious. He kept talking, but I couldn't focus on his words. All I could think about was how far we were from the parking lot and how easy it would be for him to make a wrong turn. He seemed to sense my discomfort and tried to lighten the mood with jokes, but they fell flat. Finally, when we reached the car, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. I thought about the date and how it had gone from fun to unsettling in a matter of hours. I wondered if I was overreacting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. I thanked him for the day and made up an excuse about needing to get home. He looked disappointed, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed the day in my mind, analyzing every moment, every glance, every word. I should have trusted my instincts more. I decided to unmatch him on Tinder and block his number, thinking that would be the end of it. But a few days later, I got a message that sent chills down my spine. It wasn't from him, but it was a picture he had taken of me on the trail, clearly without my knowledge. I felt sick to my stomach. It was a simple shot, just me standing at the overlook, but the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't just on a date with a guy from Tinder. I had been part of something much darker. I didn't know if he was stalking me or if he had planned something sinister from the beginning, but I knew one thing for sure. I would never trust a stranger on an app again. So I've been using Tinder for a while, swiping left and right like everyone else does, trying to find that one person who doesn't just ghost me after 2 days. I had my fair share of weird encounters, but nothing prepared me for what happened one Friday night when I matched with a guy who, at first glance, seemed like a total catch. His profile was charming, with a mix of adventure photos, him hiking, him at some beach with a golden sunset, and a cute dog that made my heart melt. We exchanged a few messages that felt easy and fun, and before I knew it, we were set to meet up at a local bar. I arrived at the bar, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. I had prepped myself with a cute outfit and a light layer of makeup, hoping to make a good impression. The place was buzzing, filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses, and my heart raced as I scanned the crowd for a familiar face. I spotted him at the far end of the bar, waving. He looked just like his pictures, which was a relief, but there was something about his smile that felt slightly off, like he was trying a little too hard to be charming. As we sat down and started chatting, I noticed he had this intensity in his gaze. It was almost unnerving, but I brushed it off, thinking I was just being paranoid. We talked about everything: travel, our favorite shows, and even our pet peeves. It was going well until he casually mentioned that he had a dark side. He laughed as he said it, but something in the way he looked at me made my stomach twist. I laughed it off, thinking it was just a weird joke, but the vibe shifted. After a couple of drinks, I realized I was feeling a bit dizzy. It was either the drinks or the conversation, which had taken a sharp turn into the realm of the bizarre. He started sharing stories about his exes, how they all couldn't handle him, and how he had an unusual way of dealing with rejection. I tried to steer the conversation back to safer topics, but every time I did, he would counter with something darker. He spoke about how he liked to test people's limits, how he found it amusing to see how far he could push someone before they broke. My heart raced, and I wondered if it was time to leave. Then the night took a strange twist. He suggested we go back to his place to continue the fun. I hesitated for a moment, feeling that familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I knew I should say no, but something about the way he looked at me, like he was trying to convince me without words, was oddly compelling. I made a mental note to keep my guard up, thinking I could just make an escape if things got weird. When we arrived at his apartment, it was surprisingly neat. The living room was filled with books, and there were some photos on the walls of him with friends and family. I felt a little more at ease, but that sense of comfort was short-lived. He poured us both a drink and started talking again, this time about something he called the game. I wasn't quite sure what he meant, but it involved some sort of challenge where he would ask me questions, and if I didn't answer truthfully, there would be consequences. At that point, my instincts were screaming. I should have left right then and there, but I was still trying to play it cool. I thought maybe I could humor him and then make my escape once the awkwardness reached a peak. He asked me a series of increasingly personal questions, and I answered most of them, feeling more uncomfortable with each response. The vibe in the room had shifted from playful to something unsettling, and I felt trapped. Then things escalated. He leaned in closer, a wild look in his eyes, and told me that he had a special way of revealing someone's true self. I laughed nervously, hoping he was kidding, but he wasn't. He pulled out a small box from his shelf filled with strange objects, little trinkets, and what looked like old, rusty tools. He explained that each item had a story, a way of unlocking deeper truths about people. At this point, I felt like I was in a horror movie, and my mind raced with thoughts of how to get out. I could almost hear the warning bells ringing in my head as he picked up a small, dagger-like object. He waved it in the air, talking about how it represented the sharp truth. I felt my heart pounding, my palms sweaty as he insisted that I choose one of the items from the box. I didn't want to play his game anymore. I wanted to leave, but I felt frozen, like a deer caught in headlights. Finally, I mustered some courage and told him I wasn't feeling well and needed to go home. His expression shifted instantly, that charming smile replaced by something darker. He stepped closer, still holding that dagger, and for a moment, I honestly thought I might have to fight my way out of there. But somehow, I managed to slip past him and made a break for the door. I stumbled down the stairs, my heart racing as I reached the street. I hailed a cab, my mind racing over the night's events. It all felt surreal, like I had narrowly escaped something dangerous. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had encountered a different side of humanity that night, one that was buried beneath layers of charm and charisma. When I finally got home, I locked the door behind me and sat on the couch, trying to process everything. I couldn't believe how naive I had been, thinking that I could handle whatever dark side this guy had. The whole experience left me shaken, reminding me that sometimes the person behind the screen can be far more unsettling than we ever expect. Tinder is supposed to be about connecting with people, but that night, I learned that some connections are better left unexplored. I thought I'd heard it all when it came to Tinder stories, but nothing prepared me for what I was about to dive into. It started innocently enough. I was scrolling through my Tinder feed late one night, a couple glasses of wine deep, looking for some casual conversation or maybe even a date. I matched with a guy named Kevin. He had a decent smile, a few interesting hobbies listed, and we seemed to share a few mutual interests. He was into hiking, photography, and had an adorable dog in his profile pictures. I figured, why not? Our conversation flowed pretty well at first. We chatted about our favorite hiking spots and shared some funny travel stories. He seemed fun, spontaneous, and a little quirky. After a few days of chatting, he asked if I wanted to meet up for coffee. I agreed, excited for what I thought would be a relaxed, fun date. We decided to meet at a local cafe that had great reviews. When I arrived, I spotted him right away. He was sitting at a small table outside, his dog tied to a chair next to him. I waved and approached, but as I got closer, something felt off. Kevin didn't quite look like his pictures. Sure, he was the same guy, but his smile seemed a little too wide, and his eyes had a strange intensity. I brushed it off, chalking it up to nerves. We started chatting, and for the first few minutes, it was fine. But then he began to tell me about his hobbies, and that's when things took a weird turn. He mentioned his love for photography, but not the usual kind. He started talking about how he loved taking pictures of abandoned places and, oddly enough, of people without them knowing. He claimed it was all about capturing the rawness of humanity. I laughed it off, thinking he was joking. But he just stared at me, waiting for my reaction, and I felt a chill creep up my spine. As we continued talking, I noticed his dog was acting strangely. It was barking at random passers-by, pulling at the leash like it was agitated. I tried to change the subject back to lighter topics, but Kevin kept circling back to his photography. He mentioned he had a collection of photos he'd taken in the woods, mostly of people hiking trails who had no idea he was there. At that point, I tried to steer the conversation towards something less creepy, but he just kept doubling down, all while his dog seemed more restless by the minute. I decided to wrap up our coffee and suggested we take a walk. I thought maybe getting some fresh air would help ease my discomfort. As we walked, he pointed out various spots where he had taken photos, and I couldn't help but notice he was scanning the area like he was searching for something. It was unsettling. Eventually, we ended up near a wooded area at the edge of the park. I thought it was a nice spot, but Kevin's demeanor shifted again. He started to get really animated about how he loved the isolation of the woods, how peaceful it felt away from the chaos of the city. He mentioned that he often came out here alone to clear his head. The more he spoke, the more I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I was starting to feel trapped in this conversation, like I was slowly stepping into his world, and it wasn't a place I wanted to be. Before I knew it, he suggested we go a bit deeper into the woods. The way he said it sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I made up an excuse about needing to get home, but he insisted it would be fun. I figured I could just humor him for a few minutes, so I reluctantly agreed to walk a bit further in. Once we were deeper in the woods, I started to feel a sense of dread wash over me. It was eerily quiet, and the trees loomed overhead like silent watchers. Kevin's energy changed entirely. He was no longer the charming guy I had met at the cafe. He became hyper-focused, eyes darting around as if he was searching for something specific. He pointed out an old, dilapidated cabin in the distance and excitedly suggested we check it out. My heart started racing. The idea of exploring an abandoned cabin in the woods with this guy felt like a horror movie waiting to unfold. I hesitated but didn't want to seem rude, so I nodded and we walked toward it. The closer we got, the more I felt like I was stepping into a trap. The cabin was overgrown with vines, and the door hung off its hinges. As he pushed the door open, foul smell wafted out, and I instinctively took a step back. Kevin, however, seemed thrilled. He pulled out his camera and started snapping pictures of the inside, the floors littered with debris and old furniture. That's when I noticed something odd. There were old photos hanging on the walls, black and white images of people who looked eerily familiar. They were hikers, just like the ones he had described earlier. That's when the pieces started to fall into place. I felt this overwhelming urge to leave, but I couldn't just bolt. I stood frozen in place, watching as Kevin moved deeper inside, his excitement palpable. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This guy wasn't just a quirky photographer. He was obsessed. I turned to leave, but Kevin suddenly appeared in the doorway, blocking my path. He had this intense look in his eyes, and for a moment I thought I would have to push past him to escape. I managed to sidestep him and made a break for it, sprinting back through the woods, my heart pounding. I didn't look back, but I could hear him calling out, sounding more confused than angry. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I fumbled with my keys, my hand shaking as I finally got the door open and jumped inside. I locked the doors and took a deep breath, trying to calm the chaos in my mind. The cabin, the photos, his obsession, it all felt too surreal. I drove away, adrenaline still surging through me, vowing to delete Tinder for good. In retrospect, I should have trusted my instincts when I first felt uneasy. It's easy to laugh about it now, but at that moment, I realized that sometimes the biggest dangers can come from the most unexpected places. I never did find out what happened to Kevin, and part of me is grateful for that. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. So, I got this Tinder story that still gives me the creeps every time I think about it. I was swiping one night, half-heartedly looking for something to distract me from my usual Netflix binge. You know how it goes: swipe, swipe, match, chat, ghost. It had been a while since I had a date, and I was feeling a little adventurous. I stumbled upon this guy, let's call him Jake. He had this rugged look, a little scruffy but in that charming way, and he seemed fun. His profile was filled with pictures of him hiking, rock climbing, and even a couple of shots with his adorable dog. He seemed like the outdoorsy type, which is totally my vibe, so I swiped right. We matched almost instantly, and the conversation started off easy. He was funny and charming, and the banter flowed naturally. At one point, he suggested we go on a hike together, which I thought sounded great. I hadn't been out in nature in a while, and the idea of spending a Saturday exploring some trails with a cute guy felt like a refreshing change. After a couple of days of chatting, we set a date and planned to meet at this popular park that had a lot of great hiking trails. The morning of our hike, I was a mix of excitement and nerves. I dressed in my best outdoor gear, comfy leggings and a cute tank top. I made sure to pack a water bottle, some snacks, and even a little sunscreen to avoid looking like a lobster later. I arrived at the park a little early, which was probably a mistake because I was just standing there, looking around trying to spot Jake. My mind was racing with thoughts about how the day would go. When he arrived, he was even cuter in person. He greeted me with a big smile and a warm hug, which made me feel instantly at ease. We started walking, chatting about random things like our favorite movies and music. Everything seemed normal for the first hour or so. The trails were beautiful, and Jake was surprisingly knowledgeable about the area. He pointed out different plants and wildlife, and we laughed about silly stories from our childhoods. I was starting to think I might actually like this guy. But then things started to take a weird turn. We ventured off the main trail onto a less traveled path, and that's when I began to notice he was acting a bit different. He started making comments about the real wilderness, and how most people never really experience nature. It felt like he was trying to impress me, but there was an intensity in his voice that made me uneasy. I brushed it off, thinking maybe he was just really passionate about hiking. As we continued deeper into the woods, I noticed the sounds of the park fading away. It was quieter, eerily so. I joked about how we might run into a bear or something, trying to lighten the mood, but Jake just nodded, his expression serious. He kept insisting that we go further, promising me the view was worth it. I hesitated, but there was something about his enthusiasm that made me want to trust him. After all, we were just out for a hike, right? Eventually, we reached a small clearing that opened up to a stunning view of the valley below. It was breathtaking, and I felt grateful for the moment. We took some pictures, and Jake suggested we sit down for a bit to enjoy the scenery. As we sat there, he pulled out a small bottle from his backpack. I thought it was just water, but when he uncapped it and took a swig, I realized it was whiskey. He offered me some, but I declined, feeling a little uncomfortable with the sudden shift in vibe. The conversation took a darker turn as we sat there. Jake started talking about how people in the city were all fake and how nature was the only real thing left. I tried to steer the conversation back to lighter topics, but he seemed increasingly fixated on this idea of purity and survival of the fittest. It was like he was sharing his philosophy of life, but it felt more like a warning than anything else. I started feeling anxious, and I could sense that something about him was off. My instincts kicked in. I began to think about how far we were from the entrance of the park, and how no one knew where I was. I suggested we should start heading back, but he brushed it off, saying we still had time. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, and I knew we needed to leave soon. As we made our way back, Jake's demeanor shifted again. He became quieter, almost brooding. I tried to make small talk, but it was like he was in his own head. I could feel my heart racing as I noticed the path becoming more overgrown, and the trees loomed larger, casting long shadows around us. I was starting to feel trapped, and I didn't like it. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination running wild, but deep down, I knew I had to be careful. Suddenly, Jake stopped and turned to me, his expression unreadable. He said something about wanting to show me a special spot that was just for the brave. My gut screamed at me to decline, but I didn't want to seem rude or paranoid. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We veered off the main path again, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The special spot turned out to be a small, secluded area surrounded by trees, almost like a hidden glade. It was beautiful, but I could feel the tension in the air. Jake seemed energized, almost manic, and he started talking about how this was where he came to escape the world. It was like he was revealing a side of himself that I hadn't seen before, and it terrified me. I wanted to leave, but I was scared of how he would react if I tried to walk away. As he continued to ramble about his philosophy on life, I glanced at my phone, hoping for a signal. No luck. Panic set in as I realized I was completely cut off. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I needed to get out of there. I finally mustered the courage to say I needed to get back, and Jake's face darkened. He looked almost disappointed, but he didn't push me. We started the trek back, but the whole way, I felt like he was watching me, assessing my every move. My heart raced as we finally made it back to the main trail. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something truly unsettling. Once we reached the parking lot, I felt a rush of relief. I didn't even say goodbye. I just got in my car and drove off without looking back. I didn't even bother to block him on Tinder or anything. I simply wanted to put that whole experience behind me. Sometimes I still think about that day and wonder what could have happened if I hadn't trusted my instincts. It's a reminder that not every adventure is one worth taking, and sometimes the scariest things are the ones that sneak up on you when you least expect it.